Well, we had to call an audible because there was big news this week. And after week 5, NFL head coach losing his job is big news. Robert Saleh was fired by Woody Johnson, the owner of the Jets, on a Tuesday morning when he was getting ready to game plan for his Monday night game against Buffalo. And it doesn't come as a surprise that Saleh lost his job. I thought the timing was what a surprise in this instance, because only 5 games into the season, a lot of football left to play. If you didn't like Saleh after 5 games, why did you like him after last season?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That'd be a good question for the Jets decision makers, whoever that was. I'm not sure whether that was Joe Douglas or Woody or whoever. But yeah, it is a little bit puzzling. It is what it is, and you know, everybody has to move forward. It's the owner's prerogative to make that decision, and clearly that's what he decided to do. But there have been a lot of things that have been kind of confusing, and it hasn't been a great situation at the Jets this year. You can kind of feel there's been kind of a chill.
It seems like everybody goes to the podium for the Jets. And I'm taking Rodgers out of this because he speaks quite often. But every player talks about a lack of accountability in the building. And to me, that just resonates as their culture doesn't have accountability in it. And that starts and ends with the head coach, right, Matt? I mean, I think that's his job to hold players accountable. And they're screaming for accountability. You know, it's a funny world we live in. Nobody wants accountability, but when there's no accountability, everybody wants it.
Yeah, as a head coach, look, you know, you're in charge of the team and the organization and making sure that it's moving in the direction that ownership and everybody down wants it to go in. I think to the point, this is a hard week. You know, they just got back from being overseas, and the organization is trying to just, not recover, but get their feet back under them, kind of get it in a normal rhythm. They got a Monday night game. They're going to come off to another short week. The timing is really hard, I think, for the organization, and they're going to have to regroup pretty quick and pull together and try to, push forward.
Well, you mentioned overseas. There was a play in the London game when Rodgers got hurt, and you noticed this, that where Robert Saleh comes on the field, and I think we can roll the tape here, that I think really tells a lot here, right, Coach? I mean, he comes over, Rodgers is hurt, but he turns his back to him and doesn't even ask how Rodgers is doing. Now, he's talking to the trainer who covers up his mouth, but you think there'd be more of an interaction, there'd be more of a kind of a chemistry. It looked a little bit of an indifferent flavor there.
Yeah, there was kind of a bad look on that play. It seemed like he had a lot of concern for the quarterback. Not trying to read too much into it, but Rodgers just took a pretty good shot there. So, that's a tough situation. It really is. But I think when you look at the Jets over the last decade, back to Rex Ryan, Mangini and Adam Gase, and now there hasn't been a lot of success.
Right.
There really hasn't been a lot of success.
Well, I mean, we go back, and it's a 34% win percentage since Rex Ryan left. That includes Todd Bowles, Adam Gase, and of course Robert Saleh. It also includes Mike McCagan, the former general manager who got fired too, and now Joe Douglas, who's in the last year of a 6-year contract, who was brought in 2019. So this organization's last playoff win was 2010. Last playoff appearance was 2010. They lost to Pittsburgh 24-19 in that divisional game, and everything's been downhill for the last 15 years.
I think, we talked about in the offseason, even before the season got going this year, it was a tough spring for them too. There was some communication there between the head coach and the quarterback, and whatever that was in the media, that became another story. And it feels like through that span, Mike, that you just talked about, there's always just another story, there's just another distraction, there's something other than just, maybe pushing ahead to try to win football games that comes up and maybe gets in the way. And I think that's tough to navigate as a head coach, and certainly, the GM, but the owner, wasn't happy and wanted to go in a different direction.
Some of the personnel acquisitions and the Reddick trade, the offensive line situation, Elijah Moore, bringing in the Packers receivers. There are really just a lot of things that haven't worked out. It hasn't all been the coach. Certainly there's ownership, the personnel department, and just to say an overall culture. Watching Hard Knocks from a year ago, that there were a lot of things that just didn't look quite right there.
And it didn't look like they fixed it. I mean, Saleh entered the year as the favorite to win Coach of the Year, believe it or not, because everybody thought on paper that this team really had the makings of going places. And it may still go there with Jeff Albright as the new head coach, but to me, it didn't appear that they corrected any of their offseason problems. I mean, they discussed bringing Arthur Smith in to be the offensive consultant. 2, they didn't want to fire Nathaniel Hackett, but they recognized there was a problem offensively. They don't do. Arthur Smith decided, I don't want to go into that mess. I'm going to go to Pittsburgh. Probably a really smart decision on his part. But to me, they never addressed it. It seems like they knew they had problems, and they just ignored it like they were going to go away.
Right, and then some issues on the offensive line where that hasn't really, it didn't work out with Becton. A couple tackles that we'll see how that works out. Just not a lot of protection. Certainly, Rodgers had a tough day out there in London this weekend, and so there's some issues there. They've overall played pretty good defense over the last few years. Like, that's been a pretty solid group, but the rest of the organization, just some of the appearance of dysfunctionality has been tough, and that's the ownership, that's personnel, that's coaching. Where exactly that falls, I'm not sure, but it just hasn't looked good.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll probably take a deep dive, when the season's over. From the top down, you mentioned it, ownership, some changes and fluctuations there through the last several years. Not, changing ownership, but who's in the building, who's not in the building, that can have an effect on the overall culture too. So I think, it's a tough day for the Jets, certainly in the building. There's a lot of people in that building that, come to work, and that security is kind of up in the air, and that's really hard. And Robert Saleh, he's a good guy. He's, works hard. He's a great football mind. He's certainly a good coach. We know that. It just, sometimes these things are real difficult. They don't work out the way you want them to. But I think what we've talked about is just the Jets for last 10 years or whatever it has been since they've been to the playoffs. They've just struggled to get back there. They just can't seem to get over the hump and get back there.
Right. I think part of, and this is what we relied on you when we all worked together in New England, was you were the chief figure-out officer, right? So when there were problems, you figured it out. I mean, all of us would give you information and say, this is what we think, this is what we should do. But you were aware of the problems, and you took input from everybody, but then you solved the problems in the way you wanted to solve them. And to me, the way the Jets are set up organizationally, they don't have a problem solver. It wasn't Saleh, because he wasn't solving any problems, and it's not going to be Jeff Albright, because he won't have the authority. To me, it's really hard on the coach if you don't have somebody in the building who can, A, recognize the problem, and B, have the authority to then solve the problem.
Right. There's got to be leadership in the building, wherever that comes from, and somebody has to answer to everybody else at some point, whoever that is, head coach, general manager, owner, president, whoever it happens to be, however it's structured. Somebody's got to have the final say. Somebody's got to provide some leadership and direction. Not sure who that is at the Jets. I'm really not.
I get the sense it's really the owner. I really do. And I mean, and that's fine. He owns the team. He can do anything he wants to do. But to me, they're late to recognize problems. I mean, we haven't even brought up the Hassan Riddick fiasco, that they trade away a third-round pick in 2026, and the guy hasn't even showed up on campus. I mean, Saleh and him have never met. Think about that. They haven't even had a handshake.
Yeah.
And so now he's gone. You've given away a draft pick. To me, it speaks to the lack of, everybody wants a collaborative effort, but somebody has to identify the problems, Matt.
Yeah, I think it's going to be real interesting going forward. Like we mentioned earlier, it's real early in the year for this. There's a lot of football left. How do they handle it inside the building? And then the players, a lot of it's going to fall on them. I think Aaron Rodgers obviously will pull the offense together. We know C.J. Mosley's a great player on defense, and he's a great leader. So we know where that leadership will be in the player part of it. It'll just be interesting to see how the rest of it comes together.
So let's spin it forward. So Jeff Albright takes over. He's got the Monday night game, a division rival. He goes to Buffalo to have to face them. The team just gets back from London. I mean, now he's got to take his role from calling the defense to being the head coach, which I'm sure he'll still call the defense, right? I mean, they're losing one guy on the sideline, but they really. How does Albright handle all those situations that he's really never been accustomed to, and he's being thrown right into the fire?
All right, well, that's a question that'll have to be answered internally, and I don't think any of us know how that'll go, but I would say hopefully they had the answers to those questions before they made the move. There's been a little bit of ready, fire, aim in New York, and
no question.
I hope this isn't another one.
Well, you don't have a 34% win percentage because you got all the answers. Let's be honest. I mean, let's just be fair here. And I know people are going to say, well, there are 3 Patriots taking heat at the Jets. But look, the record is what the record is. We can't defend them. I mean, it's hard to say. They haven't been able to really get out of their own way. And this year, they had so much hope and promise. I mean, last year they didn't want to train, didn't want to do much stuff. They wanted to take it easy on the team. They had the injury excuses, right? This year, it was a harder camp. I mean, all we read about this summer was how ready they were for the opening game, and then they go out in San Francisco and lay an egg. So I think, to me, the biggest issue is, I stand back and look at it from a general manager's point of view, is this isn't players, coaches, and scheme. This is cultural. This is cultural within the building, and until they fix the building, there's no magic wand that's going to change it.
Yeah, that's right. It'd be a total organizational effort, which it's probably been for the last decade. Again, that record is more than the coach, more than the general manager and the personnel department, more than the owner. I mean, there's got to be some accountability all the way across the board.
Yeah. And the owner, we all know owners never seem to be accountable. I mean, that's why they own the team. They can do whatever they want to do, and they have every right to do it. But I feel bad. I mean, Jet fans are probably wondering what's next.
The Jet fans, as much as they got on me for a long time, I still respect the Jet fans for their passion for the team, even though it hasn't had a great run here lately.
It doesn't deter them, though. They're optimistic as hell, right?
They're always optimistic. They're very vocal. They're very, very passionate, and they have that base. They have that support. If they can just maybe figure it out here and get it going a little bit, like those fans are there now. When they're winning 34%. When they're winning 64%, I mean, that place will be unbearable. It will be unbearable.
I got a guy on Twitter who can't wait. I mean, one positive thing is I get 5 direct messages on Twitter from him, and one negative thing, but they can come back to life quickly. I mean, they can come back to life. I mean, they beat Buffalo. Albrecht might be the mayor of New York after this is over with, right?
He might be.
I'm sure Fireman Ed is someplace right now trying to figure out what are we going to do. I'm sure, look, there'll be a lot written here in the next couple weeks about it, and it'll be interesting to see how the team and the organization handles it. You feel, like you said, you feel bad for Coach Saleh, but I think they've got problems and everything that they need to look at internally, and they got to really have a good plan to fix it.
It's really hard, and we've all had this situation where the interim coach comes in, and the players, it's almost, is he a substitute teacher or is he going to be the full-time teacher? And that becomes really hard for everybody in the organization. You're going to get a spike initially, but when you get into hard times, then all of a sudden, now is he coming back? We're not sure. Who do I report to? And the other thing I think that's fair to acknowledge for Saleh is when you fire the head coach, you're basically saying he was the problem.
Right.
And we know the Jets have more than just a head coaching problem.
We know that.
Yeah. As we spin this forward, we've all had experiences in terms of the interim coach comes in. I know from my experience it's challenging because, the players feel like, now they're really not accountable. Now accountability, and it's a tough job for the new head coach because he wants to change things. He wants to do things his way, and he's not sure whether his way is going to be able to be supported by the ownership because he's on an interim basis. And there's really only been 2. I think Jeff Fisher, when he took over down in Houston, he was promised a head coaching job, so he had some clout. But Doug Marrone wasn't, and he got the head coaching job, and he was successful. Jason Garrett the same way. He wasn't promised, but he became the head coach, and they've had longevity. But most of the time when interim coaches take over, they stay in the job, and then a year later or 2 years later, they're out of work too.
Well, look, for the players, when you change coaches, you change a lot of players. You get into a new system, you get into a new scheme, and sure, the great players can play for anybody, but then the system players and the scheme players will go to somewhere else when the scheme and the coaches change. So a lot of the players here they're on thin ice too, depending on who the new coach is going to be. But I would say right now there's probably a lot of uneasiness in the organization, and I know that when I've been in a situation similar to this, we moved the team in Cleveland in the middle of the '95 season. You think about yourself, but you think about everybody that's depending on you as the head coach. All your assistant coaches, other people that you've brought that are in the organization that support, whether it be operations, training, medical, film, video, etc. All those things. The people that really rely on you for their job security. Now, if there's somebody else coming in, that could change their lives too, and their families. It's not just that person, but also the other 4 or 5, however many people that are in their family that you just feel a lot of responsibility for, and it's tough. It weighs on you. I know we've all been through this, but it's not easy. And so Coach Saleh has got a tough situation, but everybody else is they don't have much either. I don't care what their contract situation is. They don't have much security either because nobody really knows how this is going to go. And honestly, it won't be decided until probably mid-January after the whole interview process is going through as the league has dictated as part of the policy. After all that's done, then eventually, whenever the new coach is hired, that'll be probably a couple weeks after the regular season ends. So there's a long, I would say, period of uncertainty ahead.
Yeah, I think there's no question. And that uncertainty, Bill Walsh in his great book talks a lot about this, where, when that uncertainty, everybody's worried about their next job. And instead of worrying about who the next opponent is, it takes a mentally tough person to be able to sit in your room and not think about 5 weeks down the road and focus on Buffalo when that 5 weeks down the road we might all be out of work.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you have to think about in those situations, not only at work, but then at home. I'm sure when you go home, you're going to have those conversations around the dinner table, and there's going to be concern. And, look, we love this sport. It's the greatest sport in the entire world. But when things like this happen, it affects people, affects families. Like you mentioned, Coach, like as the head coach, when you're in that situation, obviously I was too. Number one, the blame, it's you, and that's what you do as a head coach. You accept all that. But your concern, really, first and foremost, is for everybody that you hired. You look around, you said, we brought all these people here, we brought families here, we obviously were excited. It's a dream come true. Now you bring the families there, and you're looking at not only your own kids and your wife, but you're looking at the kids of your friends. We're a very close-knit family as coaches and players. You've brought players maybe that have come with you that are systematic players, like you mentioned, that are there to try to help turn whatever it is, culture or scheme. And you're looking at their families, you're looking at their wives and their kids and saying, man, I let everybody down. How do I help now? And you go in that mode where you're really just trying to make sure everybody's okay. And I think that's what you got to do, is make sure everybody's okay. And so right now at the Jets, there's a building of uncertainty. And I'm sure Coach Saleh is, his first and foremost, he wants to make sure everybody in the building is okay. But then another 5 months down the road, there's going to be a lot of phone calls, and you're going to want to try to help people get jobs. Coach Saleh is a great coach. He's done a great job. Yeah. He's a great defensive coach. We know that. His record proves that. Like all of us that have been in those situations, like it didn't work out. We don't go into the job not wanting it to work out. We're doing everything we can to have it work out, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. But he's a great coach. But I think his responsibility and what he's going to feel is that when that hiring cycle comes, he's going to try to get those coaches jobs. He's going to make sure to call all the coaches that he knows and say, hey, these are good coaches. That didn't work out. That was my fault. These are really good coaches. Some of them may be able to stay, and continue on with whatever the next regime is. But it's personal. Your kids have to go to school. Yeah. We know how that is too. That's really hard. And for the players and the coaches that have to go home at night, they're going to have to deal and listen to their kids and see how that is and make sure they're safe. That's real too. Sometimes it's not safe situations. We've both been in those where now the police got to come stay at the house and they got to make sure everything's secure there because threats are real. It's kind of crazy, and that happens, and your kids have to grow up fast in those scenarios for sure. But that's hard. I think it's hard on the coaches. It's hard when that happens. And, certainly guys like Coach Saleh and us, when we've been in those, we take that and we take the responsibility for it, but we want to make sure everybody's okay in those situations.
Your mental health, too, is hard. I know I went from, we were together in Cleveland, I went from, this 20-hour day, to picking up Matthew in the kindergarten line, like all of a sudden, wait a minute, what just happened here? Your world just goes completely, and I think the hardest thing to do is to keep bitterness out of your life, because you get so bitter about why you didn't get a chance to finish the job. I got 1 year in Cleveland as a general manager, and then you get fired for, you're not sure why, 1 year, but that's just, as we've said, it's the business we've chosen. And I think Robert's going to have to really do a good job of mentally staying sharp with it, because, these are things where if you get the bitterness inside of you, it can affect your next job.
Right, and really the best thing you can do is, for better or for worse, take the experience, learn from it, and figure out what you could have done better, or maybe what you would do in a different situation, understand what the issues were that you could learn from, and if you get another opportunity, take advantage of it, or decide who you're going to learn from to help, just become a better person, a better coach, and whatever that is. And I know for me, after leaving Cleveland, working for Coach Parcells was really refreshing in a lot of ways, because, Coach Parcells had a good way of doing things and handling things, and it kind of gave me a chance to sit back and watch him do it, having been in that seat, whereas before when I was at the Giants, I just had never been a head coach, and so I learned a lot more that way, and learned that there were some mistakes that I made at Cleveland that, I think I did a better job of in the next opportunity. So that was good. Although I would say moving a team in the middle of the year in Cleveland and then making a decision about the staff in February was a very trying period. But in the end, we all survived, and you learn from the experiences that you go through.
Yeah. I remember, just obviously my last year in Detroit, we're creatures of habit. So, you get up in the morning, you were in New England. We were actually going through COVID, so
Right.
we had a
Yes.
lot going on just as a head coach trying to figure out schedules and safety and rule changes and everything that, we had to deal with COVID so that we could put the product on the field. And, you'd get up, you'd call me at 5 a.m. and we'd talk on your ride in. And it was just great for me to have that sounding board from you every single day going to work because, you were sharing some of your experiences from Cleveland. I was going through a lot of the same things at Detroit. It's hard, you're in that mode. Mike, you said it, you're like, hey, I'm really trying here. I'm trying to pull this together. It just didn't work out. And then, that happens, you get fired, you get let go. Your friends check on you, which is great, but you go through a process of, okay, let me really sit down and really take a good look at myself. What did I do wrong? Let me make sure the families are good. Let me make sure my family's okay, number one. Let me make sure the families of the people that I hired, make sure they're okay, the players. But what did I fail? I obviously, look, we're in the NFL and we were able to ascend to those levels of whether head coach, GM, and have success that we've had because we've been knocked down, but we get back up. And this is one of those really great learning moments, I think, that, we got knocked down as a head coach. Most of the league has, I think that's the thing about it is you sit there and like, well, I can't believe I failed at this where, look, there's a lot of great coaches in this league that have been fired. That's just, you join kind of a little bit of a fraternity there. But you take a good look at what you did, and I think you really take that time to grow and say, hey, you know what, I wasn't my best year, and I think I certainly know that, my first year at Detroit was not my best year coaching. I've been coaching for a long time, and you know what, they're not all going to be perfect. I know that, in the first year, and that's not good to start off that way for sure. You don't get a long ladder if you do it that way, but, you learn, you grow, you become better, and then, as you mentioned, it was great to be able to come back home, go back to New England in a place where I was comfortable, and I knew I could kind of sit back, and we had a lot of long, great conversations about my experience. And then, to your point, we kind of still were in COVID. I had sat in the head coach seat. Remember, we had to split the squad meetings because of the size. And, you just looked at me and said, look, you're going to have one of the squad meetings. You run that. I'm going to run the other one to try to get ready for our day because we're still trying to keep the players separated and safe at that point. But that was a great reset for me to be able to go back there, come home. That was obviously where my wife was from and my kids were born, and kind of reset and try to grow again as a coach, which, look, this happens. Coach Saleh, he's down right now, but he's going to pick himself back up, and that's what you try to do in these moments.
I always tell people this all the time. I think, you can't let bitterness come in your life, and I think you have to, you're going to get, today he's probably got 1,000 texts on his phone.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to, but most of those texts want to find out what happened.
Yeah.
And then the second week, you're probably going to get 500 texts. And those people, there's some of them mean good well, but your true friends text you still the third week. And those are the people that you're going to really rely on. And those are the ones that are going to check on you and try to see to make sure that you're okay and helping your staff. And I think that's the hard part is this is the entertainment business, right? We all know that. This is what it is. And,
that's what it is.
And everybody wants to get that next big job. And you can't get mad at the person who gets the next big job or else it affects you and your job.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of be disciplined enough to work on getting better, and I think that's the challenge. Look, Robert Saleh can look at it. You can say, well, he wasn't a good head coach, but, Todd Bowles is having success down in Tampa. Yeah. He was fired from the Jets, right?
Yeah.
We saw Adam Gase wasn't, we saw that he struggled, so other coaches have struggled. Look, the two best players in the comeback players of the year the last 2 years, Joe Flacco, right, and Geno Smith are former Jet players, and this year Sam Darnold might be. So, getting fired from the Jets may not be the worst thing of all. I think you have to be honest about that because, again, I think it's more of the operating system there than it is casting a shadow on your talent because you obviously don't have the ability to run a team. You
mentioned something that I think that's really kind of key too is, when you get through that situation and you grow and you kind of stand up and say, okay, hey, look, I accept I got to do better. I think everyone thinks you're bitter about the situation, but those cities that we left, like, I hope they do well. Like those fans, like you go there and you're trying to win for the fans, you're trying to do everything you can. Like you want those fans to feel that, and so you actually feel good whether there's staff that you've left behind there that have had an opportunity to stay on and grow and have success, or whoever comes in, like you mentioned, like, hey, they're just taking a job, they're taking an open job. You can't tie that together, and you got to feel good about them, and that'll be the same situation, I'm sure, for Robert in New York.
So at the end of the day, what's next for the Jets?
Well, Michael, that's a good question. I can only go from personal experience. In 1976, I went to the Lions. It was my first year with the Lions, and the coach who hired me there, Coach Frazano, who was a very close personal friend of mine, resigned or was forced out in the middle of the season after the 5th game. Not even the middle of the season, early in the season. The personnel director, Tommy Hudspeth, took over as the head coach. And certainly for me, it was very hard to see Coach Verzano not be there. But still, there was a lot of football left to be played, and we all had a job to do, even though it was under different leadership. And at that time, we played, the next game was against the New England Patriots, ironically. And they were the best team in the league. They had won a couple games by like 4 touchdowns, and they were rolling. And the Lions at that point looked like the worst team in the league, and it looked like a pretty big mismatch. That week was a little bit of a fresh start. You know, you have a poor record, you get a little bit of a fresh start, new coach, and offensively, we put in a formation. We had a very good tight end, a Hall of Fame tight end, Charlie Sanders, and we had another rookie tight end, David Hill, and we put in a formation where we used both tight ends on the line of scrimmage instead of the traditional 2-back set. And I had only seen that one time really before, and that was in the 1974 playoff game between the Rams and the Redskins, when the Rams absolutely tore the Redskins apart with that formation, because at that time, the Redskins really couldn't figure out what was the strong side, what was the weak side, because it was a perfectly balanced formation with that second tight end in the game. And so we went into that formation, and the Patriots had a lot of trouble with it. They had never seen it before. They had a lot of trouble with it, and we were able to check the play at the line of scrimmage based on where they rotated and what they were doing, and actually won the game pretty handily. It was the biggest upset of the year, honestly, because nobody expected it to be competitive. And the New England people, even to this day, that game is referred to in the New England terminology from Coach Earhart and all the coaches that were up there as Detroit formation.
Is that how it happened?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's Detroit from 1976.
I didn't
David
know
Hill
that.
and Charlie Sanders.
I didn't know why we called it Detroit.
And when they rotated to Sanders,
Yep.
we came out to Hill. And when they rotated to Hill, we came out to Sanders. And when they went too deep to rotate to both of them, we ran either Hill or Sanders down the middle and split the defense. And they were in a 3-4 defense at that time. So it's been Detroit ever since then. And of course, the variations of Detroit, like piston and wheels and Motown and all those other Detroit terms are just Detroit terms. And so it was a great experience for me as a young coach, second year in the league, to see the change, the transition. Now, it didn't end up as a great year that year, but that particular week was just different from, honestly, any other week that I've experienced in the National Football League in almost 50 years. So you never know.
Yeah.
You never know how it's going to go.
You tell that story every time we would play Detroit. For 4 months, our offense would be yelling Detroit personnel, and really no one knows why. And then we'd play Detroit, and you tell that story, which is unbelievable. That's a great story. It's a great piece of history of the game that came out of a really tough situation.
Yeah, Ken Shipp was the offensive coordinator. Joe Bugle was the offensive line coach. I coached the tight ends that year, which was blessing Charlie Sanders and David Hill. I mean, these are two great tight ends. And we talked about changing the formation, being able to get both guys on the field at the same time, which, again, at that point in time, just didn't happen. Everything was 2 backs, a tight end, 2 receivers. You just didn't have any other formations. But it worked out, and it was one of the formations that we used later in that year, and obviously became a very popular formation later on. And Coach Gibbs and Coach Coryell and all that, and some of their 1-back, 2 tight end offenses. And now it's probably the second most popular formation in the NFL. But at that point in time, it was new, and it worked, and everybody kind of got a little bit of a spark and a lift, and it sort of carried us through the rest of the season. So you just never know.
You never know. And as the great Albert Einstein says, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity, and there's great opportunity. I mean, as much as everybody feels bad for Robert losing his job, but there is opportunity, and I think you have to take advantage of it in a difficult time.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Coach will do a good job of reflecting on the positives and the negatives. And as we said, he's a good coach. He didn't get that job because he's not a good coach.
Right.
He got it because he is a good coach, and he had a lot of success. And I'm sure that when he gets another opportunity, he'll be maybe a little bit better prepared to handle it. And look at what Coach Bowles has done down in Tampa. I mean, he's done a fantastic job down there. And
Dan Quinn's at Washington.
Dan Quinn,
Pete Carroll left. The list goes on. So.
Yeah,
Right.
and
there's no head coaching school. That's the reality of it. That's the hard thing. And when you get look, how long did it take you before you got your first head coaching interview? I mean, now these guys are in the league 3 years. They're getting head coaching interviews. So the level of experience you're going into the job with is a lot less than it was in the past. And I don't want to be the old guy on the lawn, but still, the reality of it is you got to have that kind of experience, because that job, as you can speak to as the only one, and you too, Matt, is there's problems that you don't even recognize or you even thought of that you come on your desk that you didn't think were going to happen.
Yeah, that's why it's so critical that you have another person with you, like you were at Cleveland, Scott Pioli and Nick Caserio, and you were in New England, and having somebody, it's too much for one person. It just is. So you need a general manager and personnel person. You need a coach. You need to work together. You need to be on the same page. You need to solve problems together on the team.
Yeah.
It's not one or the other. It needs to be a combination effort. And that's why we've had such great partnerships through the years. You had that teamwork that fits together. Not sure where it was exactly with the Jets, with Douglas and Robert and ownership and so forth, but again, I think after a decade of where they've been, 4% winning percentage, whatever it was, it's time to kind of figure out, hey, we need a better plan, a better format, a better blueprint than what we've had.
Yeah, it's not about just hire people. It's about how do we fix the culture. And I think that speaks. When you have 10 years of 34% win percentage, it's not about we need a better right guard, or we need a better left tackle, or we better get a better offensive coach in here. We better get an operating system that can operate and sustain success. It goes back to the Coach Walsh saying we're only competing against 8 teams when there were 28 teams, because he knew very few teams had operating systems. He knew that all those teams weren't. And if you can't figure that out, which for the life of me, as we sit here, it's the most remarkable story of all, that it takes culture to win, but nobody wants to put a culture in.
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time in developing that culture, but sometimes you're just not given the time to do it.
We all know that culture is such an important part of an organization all the way through. And honestly, that's what I love about being at this table with you two guys.
Yeah.
Just our culture, just being able to talk football, to talk about whatever it is, whether it's offense, defense, special teams, draft, building a team, accountability, teamwork. It's just a great culture. And when everybody's, pretty much on the same page, has the same vision, has the same passion, and wants to work at it, it's just so much fun to be around and do. And I can't thank you guys enough for all the times that we've had together through the years. When you think about culture, I think about how lucky I've been to be part of it. And I can kind of see in the Jets organization, you just kind of tell it's not there. And so I've been really lucky to have guys, people like you. But for this show, for you guys to be here, I appreciate it.
I think we've been lucky too, right? And I think, to me, I don't want to speak for Matt, but for me, I can't really survive in any other culture but this. That's the one thing I've learned through my failures is I need this, whether it's doing this TV show or being in the NFL or doing anything, is that this culture that I learned from you and how to behave and how to act and how to think is really the way. It's become a way of life. It's become my operating system, and without it, it's really no fun.
Yeah, Josh McDaniels and I had a great conversation one time just about working together and being around each other, and then when we weren't, and really, came back to, Coach, what you established for us. And honestly, we both kind of looked at each other and said, we've just been spoiled. We've just really been spoiled.
Yeah.
We've been in the think tank of football, for 20 plus years, where at the highest level, you've pushed all of us, all, facets of the organization to really think beyond the game. And, look, having an opportunity to come sit and talk football like we've done for so many years, but to do that every single week in person, talk about the game, it's special, it's great, I love it, I'm excited for it every week, and I know we're so appreciative for you to pull all this together for us.
Well, we'll be back to talk about it again next week.
Thank you for joining us. Please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the Coach Channel.